All right, so good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Swetland Seminar Series. We're excited for you to join us here today. If you'd like, please share your name and organization you represent in the chat box. We always like to see where people are joining us from. If this is your first time attending a Swetland seminar, or if you're not familiar with our center, a little bit about the history. In the late 1950s, David W. Swetland and Mary Ann Swetland felt that not enough was understood about the unintended health consequences of chemical, agricultural, and industrial products in our environment. So they focused the Mary Ann Swetland Professorship of Environmental Health Sciences on preventative medicine and the threats of man-made environmental hazards, so that all graduating doctors would have an interest in and understanding of the impact of the environment on human health. For over 30 years, the Mary Ann Swetland Center for Environmental Health has cultivated partnerships to develop and expand solutions that enhance environmental health for everyone. And our work encompasses various exposures influencing health outcomes throughout life, such as asthma, chronic diseases, mental health, and infant vitality. And we're recognized for our collaborative and adaptive approach that transcends boundaries to foster healthy environments where people thrive. Our mission is to accelerate pathways to vibrant and healthy environments through collaborative research, immersive training, and authentic community engagement. We have a three-pronged approach, which you'll see in this triangle over here, focused on research, training and education, and community engagement. So our goal is to build capacity for the next generation of scientists to work alongside community partners to promote healthy environments for people to thrive. So if you're interested in learning more about the Swetland Center, you can visit our website, case.edu/Swetland, email us, and we also have a link tree, and I think this link goes to our newsletter to subscribe, the Swetland Scoop. And we'll make sure to share the slides and links with everyone after today's seminar. We do have one big announcement. So we recently received some funding for a new project called Healthy Choices. And this is a rapid response initiative to support counties throughout Ohio seeking to expand healthy eating and active living opportunities for SNAP and SNAP eligible populations in the state. And the goal is to provide supports to make healthy choices the easy choices in places where SNAP consumers live, work, play, and learn. The work is supported by a grant from the Ohio Department of Job and Family Services, and all work will be completed between May 13th and September 30th of this year through two projects. So the first one, the produce prescription infrastructure enhancement, seeks to create efficiencies for SNAP consumers that are receiving produce prescriptions from their healthcare provider through technology-based solutions. So we're looking to enhance the functionality of our Produce Path app to support expansion of produce prescriptions across Ohio. And we'll put these emails in the chat and the materials we send out afterwards, but you can email producepath@case.edu to learn more. And we've also just added this to our website, so the link is down here. Still some updates to come. The second project is the mini grants. So that'll provide one-time investments to expand healthy eating and active living strategies in the following settings that serve populations receiving SNAP or eligible to receive SNAP in Ohio. So these could be at food pantries, farmers markets, early childcare centers, K-12 schools, community gardens, and I believe the mini grant application will be opening this week. So check back for updates and on this website, and we'll make sure to promote that on all our social channels as well. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and introduce today's speakers. Dawn Glasco is an author and educator with extensive experience in community engagement and collaboration building. She works to improve community health and culture by supporting projects and initiatives which promote transformation. Dawn holds a Master's of Arts in Psychology and Diversity Management from Cleveland State University, is a graduate of the Gestalt Training Program of the Gestalt Institute of Cleveland. She enjoys playing instruments used in sound healing, socializing, exploring new ideas, and spending time in nature. And Dawn currently serves as the project director for the Nourishing Power Network in Cleveland, Ohio. Dr. Owusua Yamoah is a research scientist and the community engaged research lead at the Marion Swetland Center for Environmental Health at Case Western Reserve University. She received a PhD in spatially integrated social sciences from the University of Toledo, an MA in urban studies from Minnesota State University, and a BSc in development planning from the University of Science and Technology in Ghana. Dr. Yamoah's work is primarily focused on using community-engaged approaches to leverage the lived experiences of low-resource communities to inform policy, system, and environmental changes necessary for reducing health disparities. And finally, Dr. Darcy Freedman is the director of the Marion Swetland Center for Environmental Health at Case Western Reserve University. An applied population health scientist and community psychologist, Dr. Freedman is nationally recognized for her contributions to community nutrition. She brings a transdisciplinary background to her research agenda, developing policy and systems level interventions to promote health equity by addressing the complex interplay between public health and the environment. So welcome, Don, Owusua, and Darcy. I'm going to turn it over to you all.
Thank you, Linnea.
Thank you, Linnea. I'm going to go ahead and share the slides for our presentation today. Okay. Oh, giving a sneak peek here. Okay, here we go. So good morning, everybody. I am really excited to share with you all today some of our findings related to the Nourishing Power Network. The title of our presentation today is A Food System That Works for All, the social capital story behind the Nourishing Power Network. And so Dawn, Owusua, and I are going to share different parts about how did the intervention, why did we do the intervention, what did we do to evaluate this intervention, and then where is it going now since the community action research phase of the project, it concluded. So before I begin, as a community action research project, I want to make sure we give acknowledgement to the core leadership team of the project as well as the research staff. So you can see Dawn Glasco here was one of the members of the leadership team, Sean Brown with the Humane League, Shirley Bell Wheeler with Rev Love Farm, Tom O'Brien with Neighborhood Connections, and Morgan Taggart with the FAIR Project. And within the Swetland Center, we had Owusua leading our evaluation. Emily Nelson was a data scientist, Linnea Webb as the fellowship coordinator, and Megan Paskey as our research manager. We could not have done anything we're doing and talking about today without the support of all of these people, but also many others, including our funders. So just disclosing that this work is supported by many funders. We are grateful. And as you can see across the board, they range from national foundations to local foundations to university infrastructure. Our primary award was through the Foundation for Food and Agriculture Research, and they require a dollar for dollar match. So all of our other funders were serving as match to our primary grant. So we're grateful for that support. So today we're going to start off with a focus on why do we want to look at social capital to shift outcomes in urban food systems. And then we're going to talk about our intervention strategy, which was looking at growing social capital, which we call the Nourishing Power Network. We're going to then transition into talking about how we evaluated the intervention. What did we learn about social capital changes over time? And then we'll talk about what's next. So kicking off around why focus on social capital. When we were getting ready to write the grant for this work, we had to make a case for why this was important, why we were not measuring changes in diet, changes in food insecurity, why we were actually looking at a change in social capital. So let me give you a little bit of background about why. The first reason why is because the problems of the food system are systems problems, and they are going to require systems solutions. So when we look at something which was part of our own research here at the closure of Hub 55, which was a food hub plan for the St. Clair Superior neighborhood, we have to think about what were the system forces that were making that intervention, neighborhood level intervention, not work. The other example, this is, coming out almost a month ago, looking at changes in demand for food banks. Again, what are the systemic forces that are causing such demand to go up? So number one is that system problems require system solutions. And number two is coming to this truism about systems that every system is perfectly designed to get the results that it does. So when we see outcomes like food hub closure, high demand for emergency food assistance, we know those are products of the system. They are what the system is designed to do. And it makes us go back to this idea of what is this thing that we call the food system? What is it now, and what do we hope for? And so some of our earlier research that led to the Nourishing Power Network was called the Modeling the Future of Food in Your Neighborhood study. And a lot of the work was synthesized into this document called Menu of Actions for Community-Driven Food Systems Changes. I think Owusua will put in the chat a link to that so you can read that document if you're interested. But one of the main findings of this work is moving from this idea that this is the food system. It is many pieces, but you can see there are these lines that separate out production, from processing, distribution. And when we worked with our community partners to develop the menu of actions, the way the food system as it is was described was being closed and automated, disconnected and siloed, resistant to change, hierarchical with unfair power dynamics, and constrained with limited choice. So that's sort of how we're coming in, understanding this thing called the food system. And what we imagined, our hope for the food system, these were the words that our partners used to describe the hopes, that we want it to be equitable and fair, connected and complex, open, engaging, and evolving, vibrant and abundant, devoid of structural racism, self-reliant, nutritious, and enriching. And so, again, we're starting to say, what would it look like to move to a food system that's designed to be the words that I just described? And for us as a team, we thought that meant setting a new goal for the food system, a North Star. If systems are designed to achieve its goals, well, let's set the goal for the system so that it can work to achieve those. So the goal that came out of that research was a goal of nutrition equity. And you can see at the top, we define nutrition equity as having freedom, agency, and dignity in food traditions, resulting in people and communities healthy in body, mind, and spirit, or the idea of holistic health. We also learned from our modeling work that the way to accelerate movement to that transformative goal was going to come through increasing community empowerment and food sovereignty, and really moving into work that promoted community power, community ownership of local food systems. So the big question for us as we were moving to think about, well, what would it mean to do an intervention that would leverage a lot of these lessons learned, where we centered was around this idea of social capital. Because as you can see in this side over here, community empowerment and food sovereignty, community power was a big piece of this accelerator to shift the outcomes of the food system. So social capital is a measure of community power. It is defined as access to resources resulting in power to mobilize actions. So sometimes social capital may look like the ability to make a decision. It may be the ability to set an agenda, the ability to gatekeep, so maybe preventing somebody from accessing or opening a door. So gatekeeping can be an opening or a closing opportunity. It also can be somebody who frames discourse. It's framing how we even think about issues. It can also be somebody who social capital can also be allow one to provide resources that support purposive action, so support accomplishment of a goal. When we think about social capital, we often think about it in two ways, although there are other ways, but two primary ways is around bonding capital and bridging. So bonding is the idea of very tight-knit, strong ties. Similar groups, often we say birds of a feather flock together when we think about bonding capital. Likes tend to be with likes, and a lot of the work in this area is mutual aid. So, how can we support each other? How can we offer social support? And in bonding capital, there's often thick trust, meaning we really have to trust each other to build those connections, but those bonds allow us to do things that maybe we couldn't do if we didn't have that trust. Bridging capital, on the other hand, is thinking about connecting between worlds. So you may have one person in distribution connecting to somebody in processing, or a policymaker connecting with a neighborhood advocate. These tend to be weaker ties. They also tend to be thin trust. We're not necessarily looking for mutual aid from each other. We're not looking for social support, but we may be working with each other to accomplish a goal. And sometimes we can see bridging capital in sort of policy related work where people are working together and moving things forward. So why focus on power in the food system? One, as we just saw, power is going to shape who controls resources and sets agendas. So when we look at outcomes of the food system, like food insecurity, diet quality, food access, whatever it is, we know those are products of the way the system is set up in terms of how resources are allocated and how agendas are set. Globally, the food system, power in the system tends to be highly concentrated. And we could all probably name right now who we think the most powerful actors are, the big corporations in the food system. There's limited research on harnessing community power within local food systems, although that is identified as an opportunity space within the local system to shift dynamics of the system. Most work on social capital and food security is focused on the bonding mechanisms of social capital. So how are we using mutual aid to address issues of food insecurity, for example? How are we doing food sharing to address those types of issues? Although there is some emerging work around bridging capital and food systems, some of that work has been happening around farming networks in international settings, food policy coalitions. So there are the kind of work that we're talking around social capital and food systems. There is emergence, although it's not widely used as a strategy to shift outcomes of the food system. So we were building on all of those lessons, and I think it's important to note that when we're talking about Nourishing Power Network, it didn't just emerge out of thin air. It emerged from a lot of work that was happening on the ground, a lot of work that was happening in the research space, and the combination of those coming together. So Nourishing Power Network had a mission as a community action research project to test ways to transform food systems by bridging community power with organizational power to spark and expand food justice initiatives led by the community. And as a community action research, there's a spectrum of community engaged research. And you can see on this slide here where there are indicators of how much power and control is being shared, how much responsibility and ownership is shared, participation and influence from low to high. And this research fits far on the right with high levels of community-driven research. And I'm going to share a little bit more about how that went. It was implemented in Greater Cleveland, Ohio, and it also was done in 2 versions. So everything that we're talking about in the intervention was done in like a version 1 and a version 2, fellowship 1, fellowship 2. Lessons from 1 were then used to guide the second version. So we did not exactly replicate everything as we went, we adapted as we went along. The Nourishing Power Network systems change strategy. Uh, if you look at the menu of actions, you'll see a bunch of actions. There's about 40. As we were thinking about this intervention, we knew there was not one action. If we just did this, if we just put lights in the neighborhood, or we just have one more farmer's market, we're going to change the whole system. We envisioned an engine, if you will, that had multiple gears spinning at the same time to accomplish this goal toward nutrition equity. So one of those gears was our advisory council. And this was community leaders guiding and co-leading the network and sharing their lessons learned to sustain effort. So that idea of we're adapting as we go. We also had a fellowship program. This was designed to bring in change makers new to the food system space, and they were bringing their fresh ideas to transform outcomes. We had a nutrition equity fund that was run by the advisory council. It had $240,000 of investment for collaborative and creative food justice projects led by the community. And then lastly was all three of those required an application to be in the program. The networking was the open forum space of the network. These were spaces where anybody could come in the door, connect with local food justice leaders, share their stories and talent, grow capacity and relationships. So those were open to anyone, and they were, tended to be larger events where we brought in a lot of people would come in and get to know the network and join other activities through networking. In total, there were 43 people that were involved in one of those three, not networking. So they applied and were accepted, and you can see most of those were in the fellowship. And then we also had, everybody had the opportunity, once accepted, to participate in evaluation. So of the 43, 38 or 88% of the participants decided that they wanted to complete the evaluation component of the Nourishing Power Network, which I'm going to turn it over to Owusua now to share a little bit about how we did the evaluation.
Thank you so much, Darcy. Can you move on to the next slide? So our evaluation approach was guided by the multidimensional theory of power. And we did this because we wanted to capture all the different ways in which power plays out. So this could be ways that are like overt out in the open where you can see it out play, like decision makers, resource providers, but also power that you may not necessarily see, like gatekeeping. So in doing this work, we had our participants focus on four types of power. So one were decision makers. So these were thinking about people that had the ability to move ideas into action. Example include like policymakers and people like that in the community. They also focused on gatekeepers. So these are people who have the power to limit or promote issues or voices to be included in decision making. We also considered frame setters, so those who shape how we talk about problems. We know that how we talk about problems really impact how we think about solutions and how we address them. And then finally, resource providers, because of course, whatever we're doing in the food system, resources are very important in making sure that we translate our ideas into actions in the community. Go on the next slide. So out of the 43 NPN participants, 38 of them consented to participate in the evaluation. So we did not make evaluation a requirement to participate in the intervention. Participants had the choice to either do the evaluation or not. And for those that did the evaluation, for the first 3 hours of the interviews that they did, they received $30 for baseline interviews, $30 for midpoint, and $40 for endpoint. And for any additional 2 hours, they got an additional $30 increments based on how many hours they used for those interviews. There were two types of data that we collected for these evaluations. So one was qualitative interviews, which helped us really look into some of the impacts of the Nourishing Power Network on participants and their work in the food system. We also collected what we called social network data, and we use egocentric maps to do that. When we say egocentric maps, these are social network maps where the ego, who is the subject of the network, is at the center, and all non-ego actors are added as authors. And whatever data that is collected is based on the perspective of the ego. So we do not go back to ask the other people on the map, like what do they think and who they are connected with. We ask all that information from the ego, in this case, which was our NPN participant that we were talking with. You want to go on the next slide? So really for our current research question that we are assessing today, our goal was to assess changes between baseline data and the last point data that was collected from each participant. When we say last point, these were either midpoint or endpoint interviews. So the data collection that we did baseline, midpoint, and endpoint. For some participants, they were not able to participate in all three time points. So they did baseline, but they did either midpoint or endpoint. So we used whatever last data that we collected from them as our last point data for this analysis. And among the 38 that participated, there were 7 that did not have more than one time point of data collection. So their data were excluded. So this analysis that we are sharing really includes data from 31 MPN participants, which include 9 AC members, 16 fellows, and 6 fund participants. Go on the next slide. So for our data analysis, we actually had like 3 levels of analysis. So first, we looked at the individual networks. So for each person that participated, we look at their baseline and their last point. So for the 31 participants, that meant we had 62 network matrices to look at. And we exported all this data from the software that we use for the data collection, which is VenMaker. That was what we used when we were collecting the data. We did export all that data with the actors' attributes and matrices of the connections that were recorded during the interview. And then we use R to analyze each network map and then generated network measures for each of the 62 individual network maps. And then for the individual network measures, we then use Wilcoxon match pair signed rank test to assess whether the changes that we saw from baseline to last point were statistically significant or not. You can go on the next slide. The second level of analysis that we did was to look at the whole network at baseline and last point. So whole network meant that we combined all 31 network maps from the participant at baseline into one, and we combined all 31 network maps at last point into one network. This was done by combining the matrices that we had, so ties and everything were transferred into this whole huge network map for baseline and endpoint. And then again, we use R to generate network measures for the whole network. So in the results that I share, you would see that I share the individual results and then I share the whole network as well. Go on the next slide. And then finally, we coded the qualitative responses to questions that assess the impact of MPN on participants and their food system was. So these 3 questions were what we mostly focused on. So we asked them in the interviews, what were some of the highlights for them and their food system work since joining Nourishing Power. We asked them since the last interviews that we did, what were some of the biggest accomplishments that they felt were linked to their participation in Nourishing Power Network. And then we also asked about side effects that they've experienced due to participation in Nourishing Power. And in the side effect, they talked about both negative and positive side effects. So we did code that as well to assess the impact qualitatively. So now what did we learn? We'll go on the next slide. We present our results by answering 3 key questions that we think is important as we think through why we even did this research and what we sought to achieve. So first, we wanted to really think through, can an intervention like Nourishing Power Network effectively increase the size of a participant's network? This is really important because based on the theories of social capital that Darcy shared earlier, the more people that you know, the more opportunities that you get to connect, and the more you are able to access resources through those connections. So if you go on the next slide, to assess this with the individual network, we had 3 main measures that we were looking at. The first measure is the number of nodes. Number of nodes is the number of people that were identified on individual maps. right? Think about it. We ask them to name all these people, decision makers, frame setters. So really thinking how well do they know their food system and who do they consider to be key actors in their food system. And in that, we found that between baseline and endpoint, the mean number of actors on individual maps increased from 25 to 39. And that 56% change that we see was statistically significant. Next, we look at the number of alters. So number of alters is pretty much the number of nodes minus the ego, right? If you take the ego out, everybody else that they named. Again, with that, we saw an increase of about 58%, and that change was also significant, still indicating the size of the map. And then the final measure in terms of size that we look at was the number of sites. So this is how many connections did they indicate on their map? Who knew who on their map, right? The more you are connected to somebody, the more you are able to access that power that we talked about as far as social capital. And for that, we found that there was a growth of about 156% for individual maps. So individual maps, on the average, they went from about 176 connections to 454 connections. And again, these ties were significant. So yeah, when we think about size individually, we did see that individual network maps grew in size, and those changes that we saw were significant. Now, if you go on the next slide. We then want to share some of the things that some of the participants shared that kind of reinforces some of the quantitative data that we shared. So yeah, here we see the first quote. We see one advisory council member sharing that they, through Nourishing Power, were able to connect with a food system leader, and that they didn't even recognize that they didn't have that connection and how important that was. But through Nourishing Power, they make that connection. And then on the second quote, this was a fellow speaking about a mentor that they had through Nourishing Power Network. So one of the key components of the fellowship was that we connected them with mentors who were food system leaders in the system that they continue to engage with. And this fellow is saying that this mentor did not just remain a mentor, they became a supporter of their ideas. And now they could turn to that mentor and the mentors network and say, hey, is there any support available? How can I get that? Right? So not just giving access to the mentor, but then the network of the mentor, showing that idea of growth in connection and ties, through the Nourishing Power study. So now we're going to go to the whole networks. When we put all the network maps of the 31 people together, at baseline, the number of nodes increased by 36%. So they went from 434 actors to 590 actors. So think about this as the food system network that our participant identified for the whole greater Cleveland had about 590 actors at the end of the intervention. And then again, with alters, there was an increase in alters, about 37% increase in alters. And then with ties, we found that ties more than doubled across the entire network from baseline to endpoint, about 111% increase. Then our next question that we looked at was, can we effectively increase cohesiveness of the network, right? Whilst network size is important, cohesion leads to greater unity for food system transformation. So we really want to know, well, there were many people, but to what extent is there cohesion within the networks that we saw? And go on the next slide. To assess this, we relied on network density, which is also a measure of social network. Density is defined as the proportion of ties within a network to the total possible ties that the network could have. It ranges from 0 to 1, and if you have 1, it means that the network has all the possible connections that they could have. And if you have a 0, it means you don't have the connections that we anticipate that you could have within the network. If you go on the next slide. So for density, for the individual network maps, we found that there was about 5% decrease in network density from baseline to last point, but this change was not statistically significant. At baseline, the network density was about 0.4, and at endpoint was 0.3. Both of these are within the range of moderately dense networks. And for these range, they mostly support collaboration because it's it's really like in the middle somewhere there. Not low and not very high, but it's a good range to ensure there is collaboration within a network. Go on the next slide. Again, some qualitative quotes about how these participants really think about cohesiveness in the network. They compared networks to a puzzle. And we thought this was really interesting. It says that it's like putting together this big puzzle. And it's kind of difficult because, say, you're putting together a 100-piece puzzle and you have all four corners, but I see us moving closer to each other to get the puzzle pieces. So it's one big picture. And I think about that as maximum impact. To be a part of this network in a way allows me to be immersed in what's going on in the food system. We feel like this codes really allow the participant perceive participating in MPN allows them to really immerse them in that puzzle that eventually when it comes together could ensure cohesiveness and ensure that the network is providing the maximum impact that it should in the food system. Again, looking at it across the whole networks, we observe very low densities at baseline and last point. And this low density is an indication of a lack of cohesion within the whole network. So individually, there were more density, but then once you put them together as a whole network, densities were much lower because, of course, now you have more people and the ties that we have may be fewer than what is expected. What could potentially exist in those networks. And then finally, we assess whether an intervention like MPN can effectively increase bridging across silos of a network. And bridges are important because they can help increase innovation and communication, especially in large siloed networks, right? When there are silos, if there are bridges, they are able to cross information and innovation across two different groups. Go on the next slide. To assess this, we also use two network measures. One is the number of components, and the other one is the betweenness centrality score. So number of components assesses the number of distinct disconnected groups within a network. So of course, if your number of components is one, it means that you have one whole network. There isn't any silos or different groups within them. The higher your number of components, the more silos you have in your network. And betweenness centrality, on the other hand, assesses how often nodes serves as bridges between authors, right? So when you have more components and there are people in between that are bridging across, the more bridges you have, your betweenness centrality score will be higher in that case. Go on the next slide. So for individual networks, on the average, we do see that there were less fragmented networks individually because at baseline, their number of components were 1.6. At the last point, it increased to 2. In terms of betweenness, we were very low betweenness score, although that increased by about 100% between baseline and last point. The low betweenness and centrality coupled with a low number of components really suggests that these networks do not really rely on fewer nodes to connect others and that they are more connected, right? Because there's like at least two components within the network. Again, a quote from a participant showing how there's really less bridging and the fact that they get access to other actors by themselves. This participant shared that they got a chance to speak to a professional web designer and to tell them what was possible and what wasn't, and how websites are created, and whether or not what they were thinking of doing was actually possible, which in fact it was based on the conversation they had. And now they and the web designer are eager to do the work as they go. So really having like direct access to these key stakeholders in the food system was something that fellows were able to access. And then finally, across the whole network, we did find that the number of components increased from 3 to 11 from baseline to last points, and betweenness decreased by 33%. So for this, higher components indicates there are more siloed network, and low betweenness reflects less connections across silos. So yeah, I'm going to turn it to Dawn to speak more about what's next, given what we know and where we are now with the Nourishing Power Network.
Thank you, Owusua. Thank you, Darcy. Um, could you go back to that picture? Okay. So when we talk about or think about what's next, what comes up for me when I see this picture is that we have several areas in which we're concentrating in because of our idea champions. Our think tank idea champions who brought up these different ideas where they think that we should put our focus. And one of those areas is gardens at every school or school gardens throughout greater Cleveland and Cuyahoga County. So what we did recently was partner with A.J. Rickoff Elementary School along with Key Bank, teachers, neighborhood volunteers to put on an event whereby we restored the garden at that school. The garden was in disarray, it needed some weeding, de-weeding, some planting. So we got together with a number of people, I think it was about 50 of us that came out and actually, along with some students and teachers, contributed to remaking and revitalizing that school garden. So again, school garden is one of ours. Investing in school gardens is one of our areas of focus. And as we think about increasing social capital or making new connections, we continue to do this through the activities that we engage in moving forward. So we had the opportunity to connect with people we hadn't known, to hold conversations with people from Key Bank, as well as some students and teachers, members of the Nourishing Power Network, had a chance to make new connections. So we continue to see that the network continues to grow as we move along and do the work. So what? So when we talk about opportunities for unification, creating shared language and values and roles of brokers who open or close doors, we also look at everyday people as brokers, right? We use a lot of language that represents titles or labels that either highlights where a person's position is or the power that they actually hold. But when we look at each other as power brokers, everyone as a power broker, we ask ourselves, who do you know? What do they know? And how can they contribute to the network? So in a basic way, we look at how we can work together to continue to innovate, to contribute to the network, to enhance skill development, to increase the amount of people who attend networking events, and to learn together and grow together to make collective decisions around our commonality and how we want to achieve our goals. So when we talk about how is this shaping our next steps, so when we look at nutrition zone policy action, and again, the gardens in every school, champions and advocates for every neighborhood, and centralized support for nutrition zones. When we talk about advocates in every neighborhood, just by doing activities such as focusing on gardens at every school, we recognize advocates in every neighborhood. So there were parents who showed up as well as students who showed up. There are advocates in every neighborhood. How do we identify those advocates? So one of the questions we ask ourselves, who are the leaders in the neighborhood who care about food systems work? And there are people who, from nutrition educators, from cooks, to backyard gardeners, to porch gardeners. There are people everywhere in every neighborhood who care about food systems work. So all we do is connect with people and identify who those people are. Who are your neighbors who are backyard gardeners? Who are your neighbors who are growing their own food inside their home? Who are your neighbors who care about showing up at events? And then when it comes to centralized support for nutrition zones, we continue to look for people who can add value to our work, people who can support the communications about Nourishing Power, people who can bring new people into the network, folks who are willing to foster skill development, teach classes, be a part of nutrition education, and people who are overall champions of what we do, to continue to build these nutrition zones throughout Northeast Ohio, throughout greater Cleveland and Cuyahoga County. So when we talk about nutrition zones, we're looking at people who are willing to partner, to work together and collaborate to ensure that access to healthy, quality food is available in communities. So we currently have 4 nutrition zones in the making, and we're looking at a 5th one possibly this year in the central neighborhood. Last year, we were able to implement a farm stop in the central Kinsman neighborhood, and this year we're doing the same. In addition to that farm stop, we've also developed an incubator for farmers, for makers, and growers who are interested in being a part of the network, the Nourishing Power Network, and who are interested in participating in events like Fresh Fest, and who are also interested in being a part of growing the connection of people who are involved in food systems work. Another piece of our work are our networking events. And we look at these as social gatherings. And in fact, recently, one of our fellows reached out to me and said, I love how Nourishing Power Network does networking events because it is a space where I can meet people just for the sake of learning. And I don't have to worry about showing up to impress other people, but actually just to share what I know, to share resources, and to connect with each other more deeply, and to learn about events and places around Greater Cleveland and Cuyahoga County where I can show up and be a part of food systems work. And it doesn't feel pressure when the Nourishing Power Network has networking events. So all of these gatherings and coming together, we look at those as networking opportunities where people can expand and increase their social capital, thus learn new skills, connect with people who may have resources that can be beneficial to the work that they're doing in food systems work. We recently created a virtual community on OAC Engage so that everyday people can jump in and be involved, learn what's happening with the Nourishing Power Network, as well as other community groups who are a part of food systems or food justice work. So from beekeepers, community gardeners, backyard gardeners, funders, porch gardeners, nutrition educators, all sorts of people who care about food systems work. So we have a central location where you can see our mission and our vision. We have about 35 people who have joined this virtual community, and we share information, we post events, people comment on other people's events, we share articles that inform people about new trends in food systems work, and it's just another way for people to connect. We have an upcoming event, which will be our second social event, which will happen on June 28th. Now, this is a collaboration between Hood Honey, which was one of our fellows, and a food entrepreneur, Trey Ronnie Williams, who is a beekeeper and who sells honey and other products made through honey or different properties of bees. And it's also a collaboration with Food is Medicine Mobile and other vendors who will be a part of this event. So this is a way in which the Nourishing Power Network is expanding itself through collaboration, and we're looking at ourselves more of it as a connector, who is not seeking to hold all the power, but sharing power amongst different community groups, different entities within Cuyahoga County who want to work together and be a part of food justice work. So all of you are invited. I hope that the flyers being posted on your website so you can see what is going on. You can follow us and be a part of this movement.
Thank you so much, Dawn. I'm going to just briefly review here. When the slides come out, you will have access to all of the references that we included in our presentation today. And thank you all for listening. And we want to open the floor for any questions that you may have for Dawn, Owusua, or me about this research. So I'm going to close the slides now. We can pull them up if we need it, but we're excited to hear any questions. You can put them in the chat, or I think, Linnea, people can come off mute and actually ask their question.
Yeah, people can raise the hand if they want to come off mute, and then we can open their mic for them.
Let's see, I just saw a question, but now I can't find it.
Oh, yes, Ruth, we'll be posting a recording of this on our YouTube channel by the end of the week.
Well, I have a question for Dawn. I think one thing that stood out to me, and I think Owusu would be helpful to hear your thoughts. So you talked about advocates in every neighborhood, and a lot of times when we think about change, we think about a top-down, right? Top-down policy or big corporations or whatever it is are going to push things down. But what you were really getting at is a bottom-up approach by being present in the neighborhood. For example, working on gardens in every neighborhood, you're able to meet the local advocates, and then you're able to build that synergy, to build social capital really around the topic. So I'm just curious. The one thing that I see is that like that 500 and almost 600 people in the network that Owusua talked about, if you started to go to advocates in every neighborhood, you can see how that would expand a lot. I mean, everybody could be in the network of the food system because we're all eaters minimally in the food system. So we all have a role. But it also, from a cohesion perspective, Owusua, it means that we could be very disconnected. So I'm curious, how do you build that localized, grounded support and also build the connections that people see that we're all part of this whole thing called the food system? So I was just curious, either or both of your thoughts on that.
Yeah, well, a huge part of it is awareness. So somebody talked about reading the room. There was one teacher, A.J. Rickosh, who would always remind students to read the room. So when you read the room, who's in the room, right? And how are these people connected and or disconnected? And what are the possibilities? So just looking at the situation with Gardens at Every School and us being at A.J. Rickoff, you had a teacher, you had teachers in the room, you had folks from Key Bank in the room, you had parents as well as students in the room, members of Nourishing Power Network. Who knows who, and how can I connect with this person through that person? So when you think about the cohesion and bringing all of these people together and looking at things in a more holistic way rather than from, okay, either the bottom or either the top or either down, and I don't want to use that word bottom like it's in a derogatory way, but grassroots or community. So just looking at ways in which people are already connected, who's connected to whom, and how can we just hold those conversations to foster deeper connections, and then have meaning behind those conversations. So to your point, what's next? What's next is often a part of the conversations that can help us deepen those conversations, deepen those relationships and those connections so that we can move together in unison for a common purpose. Yeah.
I think from the data points, from what we saw was that individually, as people participated in Nourish and Power, they got to build the size of their network. They got to make more connections with people. But as we brought the whole networks together, we found that density was significantly low. So I feel like it might be, I think the goal is not that everybody is connected to all policymakers in the area, but how do we get this network to a point where there are bridges who could bridge one part of the network to different types of power? I think that is probably for me, looking at nourishing power intervention and the data and where we are at now, I think the next step is thinking to how do we what spaces should people be in and what can be done in order for these networks to be connected to different types of power. I do feel like there is still room for growth and room for thinking through how to continue to grow the ties and the network. Of course, I think we've had conversations about the fact that there's probably more than 590 actors in the food system in the whole greater Cleveland. So there's still more people that are not in the network. But I think ultimately the goal is to make sure that the different components of the network compartment have access to all the different types of powers that we talk about, decision makers, frame setters, gatekeepers, resources. And I think that could be its own intervention or something that John and the Nourishing Power team continues to explore.
Thank you. We probably have time for one question if we have it. Any other questions from the group?
I have a question for the group.
Okay.
So, group members, those who are attending, can you all state something that you are taking away from this presentation this morning? What is something that stuck with you, or you're taking away, or something that you're interested in your own work or life moving forward?
And you can come off mute or just type it in the chat. Great question, Don.
Casey, you stated the importance of building relationships and community. Could you say just a little bit more about that? If you're able to.
Okay, sorry, I was trying to be able to come off mute. Yeah, I just really appreciated what you all shared and appreciate hearing about the example of, when you've brought people together just for the, with the intention of it being a time for building relationships and networks, and that, folks felt that that was so valuable that they didn't have to, you know, prove anything to be there, that it was just about building the relationships itself. And I think so often it's like, oh, we have this event for this reason and we're going to add a bit of networking, but really bringing the intention to the value of building those relationships and those webs of people. So yeah, just great work, and appreciate you all sharing and all that you're doing.
Thank you. Thank you.
Great. Unfortunately, we're at our time for today. We are going to be wrapping up this talk. Linnea will send it out by the end of the week. You will continue to hear amazing things coming out of the Nourishing Power Network with the work that Dawn is leading. We didn't really make a clear statement of transition, but at the end of the official action research project, the leaders of Nourishing Power Network selected somebody to continue moving it forward in a community-led way. And so Dawn was selected to be the leader of that. So that's the work that she's doing now. So as a follow-up from this, we will also share information about that mini grant program to share with this network because I think many of you might be interested in that. And we can also share the flyer for the event that's coming up on June 28th, so people are aware of that. So thank you all, and we look forward. Our next seminar is going to be in the fall semester, so we'll look forward to seeing you in September. Take care.
Thanks, everybody.